Okay, we are now live. So today is going to be, I believe, the first debate on my channel. And I'm joined by Miss IndigoFoxe, who is a self-proclaimed trans activist. And I came to know of Indigo because of just different tweets that she took issue with on my Twitter. And so we'd go back and forth a little bit. And then recently, I did an appearance on my friend Shane Dawson's podcast, Shane and Friends. And one of the topics of the podcast was transgenderism, everything that entails. And Indigo took issue with a few of my statements on that show and started a change.org petition to get her onto Shane's show to debate me. So what we did instead was say, well, let's just do it on my channel. So that's what we're going to do. So if you want to say hello, Indigo. And Jeff Holiday will be moderating. He's here as well.
Hi guys, I'm IndigoFoxe. I write things sometimes. I'm kind of messy. That's really about it.
Okay, so I'm going to read a couple excerpts from the change.org petition because I feel like it kind of encompasses your general feelings. And by the way, disclaimer for everyone watching, I have what I believe is the beginning stages of strep throat. So hopefully the fact that I'm in pain doesn't make me irritable. And hopefully if I do get irritable, Jeff Holiday will keep me in check.
Don't tempt me.
Okay, so Indigo's change.org petition says, a few weeks ago, digital media saw men and comedian Shane Dawson had trans and conservative blogger, already a problem, I'm not conservative, but I'll keep reading, Blaire White on his Shane and Friends podcast. Blaire White's colorful content consists of videos with titles like Islam apologists are cancer and this is why people hate trannies. Classy. That was your words, not mine. And then you go on to say that my opinions are inflammatory and that they're based solely on my personal biases and experience and that they're perpetually outdated, unfounded. Let's look at some other stuff that you wrote. Basically that I was right-leaning with my stance and that it wasn't legitimate. So is there anything you want to say just in general about the podcast?
The podcast in general, I didn't dislike, right? The discourse between you and Shane, I thought was healthy in the sense that Shane, being a person self-proclaimed ignorant, as he said himself, was fine. The thing that I had with the issue that I had with the podcast was that a lot of the things that you said I found to be unsubstantiated in like 101 ways. So.
Okay, so we have a list of bullet points. I think there's a bad echo in here or a weird noise. I'm not sure. We're fine, actually. Okay, so we have a list of bullet points of the specific issues that you took with what I said. The first one we have is that I said gender dysphoria is a mental illness. And you said that you partly agree on that. Gender dysphoria is listed in the DSM as a mental disorder. So if I misspoke and said illness instead of disorder, then that's what that is. But it is a mental disorder.
The reason why I said that I took issue with that and why I partially agreed is because when I was first diagnosed with, when I was little, it was called gender identity disorder. I'm pretty sure it was like a whole medical thing when I was little and diagnosed. The reason why I took issue with that is not because I disagree with it on being a mental disorder issue, whatever you want to call it, because like you mentioned in the podcast, if you have to see a therapist, if you have to get like medicine for it, and something might be wrong. I get that to a degree. But the thing that I think that most people have an issue with when you say that gender dysphoria is a mental illness is the negative connotation that most people, especially in Western culture in regard to our like entertainment industry, have their idea of mental illness. Like, for example, Split just came out, which basically demonizes people with dissociative identity disorder. Someone's talking in the background, and or be it orphan, all these things that paint mental disorders in general as bad and taboo. And so I think that the issue is that even though we as a people in general have moved on with mental illness in one sense, like we don't lock crazy people up anymore, right? We don't give people shock therapy anymore, right? But as we moved on with mental illness, we haven't gotten there with gender. And that's really evident in things like people saying that trans women are a danger to little girls in bathroom, which obviously has no basis in fact, or that trans women want to force lesbians to fuck them, or we're trying to rape lesbians by trying to include ourselves in queer and lesbian dating spaces. So I think it's not really that I take issue with the classification of gender dysphoria being a disorder, because like you said, it's recorded as a disorder, but the negative connotation I think people can't get behind. And I don't really remember what I'm trying to say, but when you say things like, the point is that I think we can go about things in a different way, and probably not so much demonizing, but grouping gender dysphoria in with things like what we see in television might not be a good idea.
Well, so is your issue just with the fact that I called it what it is? I guess I'm just a little confused about what your issue is. Should it just be an unspoken thing, like, yes, it's a disorder, but let's not hurt anyone's feelings by saying it? Because I would rather we attack that stigma against people with mental disorders, because I think we can agree that I don't, want anyone to be stigmatized for something they can't control, any sort of immutable attribute, especially mental illness. So it's always been my argument that, like, yes, being trans does mean that you have a mental disorder. That doesn't mean that it affects the rest of your cognitive abilities. It doesn't mean that it affects your life in some huge, monumental way. It just means you have this one thing and people deal with it. So was your issue just that I called it what it was, or should I have said something else? Or
no, I think, okay, so let's just take it in general, right? So it went from being a sexual perversion, and then we go to gender identity disorder, and then in around 2000, I think, somewhere around that area, it became gender dysphoria. And a few years ago, it actually got moved to its own page. Gender dysphoria got moved to its own page in the DSM or DMS. I don't actually remember what the acronym is. But I think that was done in an attempt to remove the stigma from gender that is associated with mental health in the first place. And so I guess what I want to ask you is that when people get, the outrage culture, when people get upset, when you call gender dysphoria a mental disorder, even though we can all agree that that's currently the standing of basically every medical professional ever, do you think you contribute to that discussion by liking it to things that people perceive as negative?
No, because like I said, I think the problem is that people perceive it as negative to begin with. I'm not going to sugarcoat reality or refuse to call it what it is just because some people may feel negatively about it. In fact, I think that admitting that it's a mental disorder actually makes it more legitimate, because to a lot of people, I'm sure you can agree with this, a lot of people's perception of transgenderism is that they're just playing dress up. There's no, actual thing innately that makes you want to be female or be perceived as such. So I think if you just reduce it to, something that's not a mental disorder, it's more of a joke. Do you agree with that?
I wouldn't, well, in that context, yeah, I guess I could see it in that way, but I guess joke wouldn't be the word I would use, but I understand what you mean.
That's not my word. That's not my word. That's a lot of people's word.
Yeah, I understand what you mean, though.
I'd rather people understand that it comes from something, with your wiring, with the way that you're born, rather than people just assuming it's about playing dress up.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Okay. So do you want to move on to point number 2?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, you took issue with me talking about the fact that people go back, that they transition and then decide it's not for them. So do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, this is one of this. Okay, so I've been doing activism in the LGBT community since I was 14. I started my school's GSA. I've gotten to speak to politicians. I've actually been a part of policy changes within my state. I've been on HuffPost Live, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think this issue I took the most issue with this is one of the points I took the most issue with, because even though I'm totally aware that people do indeed regret transitioning. They do indeed feel like they need to go back to being the gender that they were assigned at birth. This isn't a phenomenon that is so widespread within the trans community that we need to talk about it in any legitimate way, especially in regard to.
But it is legitimate. I mean,
that's true. Granted, like I said, I understand people do indeed go back, but in regard to, let's say, for example, like one of the things that's on this list as well is children transitioning. I don't think that it has any substance in so far as that, you know, you're more likely to win an Oscar having not even written a screenplay than to be diagnosed with to want to go back before transitioning. And I actually have notes here so that I'm not like misconstruing anything or putting out false information, because no one likes that. Research has found, these things are, I have sources. Research has found that from 2000, research found last from 2003 was when a lot of people bring up people detransitioning is what I like to call it. From papers that were written in Sweden in 2003 and 2009.
Not me, by the way.
Not you, by the way. Okay. But when a lot of people talk about detransitioning, they love to point back to these Swedish articles, and this has been a phenomenon that's been going on in trans debates for a really long time. Bree, I think her name is Tana Hill, is an educated queer writer for the Huffington Post. In 2014, she wrote an article titled, I didn't write that down, which is silly. She wrote a title, I think it was titled Myths About Transition or something along those lines. Her name is Bryn Tannehill. It's spelled Tannehil
Wait,
for anyone who's
can I just
interested.
ask a question?
Yeah.
So we're sourcing Huffington Post right now?
What's what's wrong with that?
I mean, Huffington Post is basically an opinion website. It's highly biased.
That's fair, I guess. But
it would be like me. It would be like me pulling like a Fox News article or a Breitbart article about how like people shouldn't be trannies or something.
But the difference between Fox News and Breitbart, at least in the difference between Fox News, Breitbart, and say the Huffington Post, in my opinion at least, is that Bryn has 6 sources here from educated medical professionals, and people like Bill O'Reilly say things like Islam is a problem without any basis in fact, without giving sources.
I mean, if she's well sourced, then that's one thing, but I think it should just be known that BuzzFeed has a narrative that they push. I mean, not BuzzFeed, Huffington has a very clear BuzzFeed too, by the way. BuzzFeed too.
BuzzFeed is trash. I get it. I know. But can I finish the?
Yeah, sorry.
She says in the article that surgical regret is actually very uncommon. Virtually every modern study puts it below 4%, and most estimated to be between 1 and 2%. This is from Cohen and Kempton. They wrote the book called, I think I have it written down somewhere actually, so I wouldn't forget. It's a book about intersexuality and transgenderism in adolescence. And see, there are 6 other sources from this specific article. And so if let's just be generous, right? If say, and you said on the podcast, which it may have been true then, but now you said on the podcast that the last time you checked that the population of trans people in the world was like 0.3% or something along those lines. I
estimated, but it's important to understand that there is no consensus on a real trans population because we're not included in the census. No one knows how many fucking trannies there are in the world. So that's important to know. Another thing I think I should say to everyone is that the context in which this podcast was it was a very like, it was like shit posting in real life. Like we were laughing and crying, laughing. And, you know, I think that's important just to know. So for me saying a lot of people go back, First of all, I've seen studies that completely contradict what you're saying, that most people actually do regret their surgeries. Not saying I believe those either, because the thing to know about trans people is that I really have a hard time believing any studies done about trans people, because I personally have never seen one in my entire life, other than some articles about the neurology of being trans. I've never seen any that don't have an agenda. I've never seen any that aren't trying to prove that hardly anyone goes back or everyone goes back. It's not black or white. There's nuance, and I've never seen a study doesn't have, a very clear agenda.
Well, so that brings up a really interesting point, because the Williams Institute on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, whatever, law, something, I'm going to use their information, say that there are approximately 1.4 million trans people in the world. And so let's just assume that that's true. That could be completely fabricated, and I don't know the details of that. So let's just assume, for the sake of the argument, that it's true. If there are indeed 1.4 million people, 1.4 million trans people in the world, and let's be generous and say that the statistic from Bryn's article is like the highest is 4% of people who regret transitioning. If that's true, 4% of 1.4 million, and I didn't write that down either, that's so stupid. Let's do basic math. 4% of 1.4 million, it's like somewhere around 50,000, right? So if of the, 50,000. So if of the 1.4 million trans people in the world, right, and of those, let's assume that they all medically transitioned in some way, hormones, whatever else have you, and 50,000 of these people regretted doing that. Is this, do you think, is 50,000 people who might regret transitioning in some way enough to say that, to say things like kids can't transition? And there's a plane flying over me. I live right near an airport, so I don't know if you can.
If you want to mute for a second, I can respond, so the plane's not loud. Okay, so first of all, the entire premise of that is assuming that those numbers are correct, which I have a problem with, because I just don't believe they're correct, and I don't think you even necessarily believe they're correct. I will say that the reason I mentioned that people go back is, first of all, because I've seen a lot of people. I mean, I've gone to Stonewall events, Stonewall meetings for years, and sat at roundtables with trans people. A very large chunk of those people think that they're trans, and they go back. So that's number one. That's my personal experience, and that's anecdotal, but that's my personal experience, and it's worth stating. Second of all, the reason I stated it was because I don't believe that children should transition based upon the fact that if there are adults who go back, how are you to put faith that a child won't go back? I also have a fundamental problem with permanently altering your body and or sterilizing yourself as a child when you're not old enough to understand the ramifications of such a thing. So, if what you're saying is correct, the numbers are correct, say only 4% of people go back. Say it's 50,000 people. That's a lot of people who have permanently altered their body and permanently destroyed their ability to have children in many cases. Then no, I don't go with that. And I don't think that because only 4% hypothetically would go back, that it should just be a green light for children to transition. I just don't.
So,
and I think that there are extreme cases. I've heard of cases of 16-year-olds that are so just sure about their transition and that go to extreme lengths like self-harm and stuff like that. I think they need help. I don't think that they need to change their bodies. And I think that if that problem persists into adulthood, certainly do something about it, certainly act on it. And if you want to respond to that, and then Jeff Holiday says that he has an interesting sideline if you want.
Yeah, I would like to respond. I think it's really interesting because you brought up a really good point that in your personal experience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I find that to be interesting because as far as I'm aware, you didn't make any personal decisions about your body until you were old enough in your mind to understand the ramifications of those decisions, right? And that's completely fine and valid. I understand that. I personally would have, I was a very smart kid. I'm not saying that I was perfect, but having done the research I've been doing, having been doing the work that I've been doing, I was pretty aware of the things that was going to happen to me. I knew at 13 that I wasn't going to be able to have kids, right? I knew at 13 that I could possibly die. And
well,
maybe
you
those
can know, I mean, you can know that you won't have kids, but that doesn't mean that you understand the ramifications of losing that ability. I mean, I didn't want kids up until maybe like a year and a half ago. I was like, fuck kids, I don't want kids. And now, especially with being on estrogen, I don't know if you're on estrogen or whatever the case might be, but you get this weird maternal instinct, and I want kids now. And I'm the type of person, if you would have asked me at any other point in my life, I would have said no. But if I would have transitioned, 13, 14, 15, I wouldn't have that choice to make. No one knows at that age whether or not they want to have kids. You can understand, taking this pill means I can't have kids. That doesn't mean you understand losing the ability in full.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I totally understand where you're coming from. So my question for you then is, so again, back to the numbers, assuming that only I don't want to say only, delegitimizing the feelings of people who detransition, but only in this context, 50,000 people, sure, it's a lot, granted. But does that mean that you wouldn't allow children with the help of their parents to make decisions about their body? Like if it were up to you, would it be illegal for children not to transition? And if the answer to that is yes, if you would have children not transition, I take issue with that. One, because like you yourself said that you made a decision about your body before you were even 18. First. Second,
What? No, I didn't.
On Shane Dawson's podcast, you said you didn't make the decision until you were 17 to start transitioning?
No, I never said that. I started transitioning at 20.
So maybe I'm misquoting you, but I'm pretty sure you said that at 17, you thought to yourself, this is what I have to do. This is what I want.
Oh, well, I think around 17, 18, it was, a lot heavier on my mind. And I was thinking, I think this is really what I have to do. But I didn't make the decision until I was 20.
Okay. So that aside, even still, say for example, I know about myself, right? If I had known what I know now, I probably still would have gone through, like 90% sure I would have gone through with transition at 14, at 15. And there are scores of other people who feel the same way. So if people like me, for example, know what they want and understand the ramifications of what's going on and what might happen to them, would you still have them not transition? Because the thing about transitioning besides the medical, is that transition is a gateway to health for a lot of people, right? A lot of teenagers kill themselves before they go through transition.
But I take issue with the whole, there's this talking point out there. I've seen memes about it that you won't
I
let
love
your
a
kid
good meme.
So do I. But there are, leftist memes out there. People saying like, oh, you wouldn't let your kid transition, but you let them kill themselves because they can't transition. It's like, I don't like, threatening parents that if you don't let your kid transition, they're going to kill themselves. I find that really reprehensible. I find putting that on parents is not right. And while it is true that there's a lot of studies that have been done that show that suicide is more prevalent among trans people, I don't think that, during, before, or, right after puberty, putting that on parents that if they don't let their kids permanently alter their bodies, they're going to kill themselves. I think if someone's going to kill themselves, they need help. I don't think that they need to undergo that stuff, because let's be real. When you first go on hormones, again, I don't know your situation. I am on hormones.
We're clear, I am on hormones.
Okay, maybe you can relate to this then. Almost everyone I know who started hormones, especially male to female, they go through like a lot of struggle at first, a lot of mental, emotional struggle, because so much internally is changing. Never mind, the physical changes. You go through a whirlwind of, just mental changes, emotional changes, instinctual changes. So it's like you're adding that on top of the normal stress of being a preteen or a teen. And I find that a lot of people would probably crumble under that. That's my assumption. Because again, there are no long-term studies on what happens to a person who transitions at an early age. It's a very new phenomenon.
So I'm going to step in real quick. I have to say, first and foremost, that it is a delight to moderate for the two of you, because this is probably the easiest debate I've ever moderated. It's you're both doing wonderful jobs of allowing each other to talk, and it's great. So from our bullet points that we've been looking at, we went from number 2 about transition regret, and you guys have naturally moved towards kids transitioning. Are we going to put a pin in transition regret? Are you ready to move completely on to kids transitioning? Because
well, the reason we went straight to that was because the reason why I mentioned on the podcast people are detransitioning is because I was making the point that kids shouldn't transition because adults go back. So why wouldn't a kid? So it was kind of like 2 in 1.
Absolutely,
in my opinion.
I just wanted to make sure because we started drifting into suicide and social versus medical transition. Those are down the list. But by all means,
if there's anything else that Indigo wants to say on sort of those 2-3 points meshed together, then you can do that, Indigo, or we can move on to number 4.
I guess like a final word on my end is that I'm finding it really hard to wrap myself around this idea of children not transitioning. And maybe that's just my bias as a trans person who really wanted to transition when I was younger. But but it's not like if I don't know what I'm trying to say. I can't wrap my head around not letting kids transition simply because some people regret the transition itself. And I think that's just really what I have an issue with.
Well, that's not the only reason. Like I've mentioned sterilization so many times. I know a lot of people like to say, well, not everyone goes sterile. Most people go sterile, especially if you do it at an age where you're still developing. It's just a thing. If you transition at that age, you can't have kids. To me, I've said it a million times, that's where I think the conversation should end. I think any discussion of kids deciding not to have kids at 13, 14, 15, 12, 11, I think that's ridiculous. That's my personal opinion. I also don't find it acceptable for children, they can't get a tattoo, they can't get a piercing, but they can grow tits. That's where I'm coming from. I mean, I don't see how that's acceptable.
I guess we're going to have to agree to disagree.
Yeah, and I will say to your point of, it being your bias as a trans person who wishes they would have transitioned earlier, I find that a lot. I find that most people who argue for this are just trans people who wanted to do it earlier. And listen, I've had those thoughts myself. When you're trans, you always think like, oh, I should have done it earlier because the boobs would be a little bigger or this would be a little different. But it's like, you kind of have to realize looking back that it wasn't the time to do it. That's my personal opinion. I've never been able to be swayed on that. So if I'm coming across as fickle, it's because I'm fickle.
I love you.
So if you want to move on to number 4.
Trans trenders. Okay, yeah, sure.
What was that about?
Where's my note on that? That's number 4, right?
Yeah, it's number 4. It just says trans trenders.
Let's see. Okay, so Shane Dawson made...
Wait, can I say one thing
really quickly?
I really appreciate everyone donating money in the live chat. I never thought,
cool.
YouTube would enable it. It's really cool. And all proceeds, if you're donating, are going to go towards improving equipment on my channel. So higher quality videos. I want to get some cute backdrops, some better lighting, a better camera, etc. So just thank you guys so much. Some of you are donating a lot, like $30. Thank you so much. And yeah.
Okay.
So we can go back. I had to think them.
Shane Dawson made a really, really facile argument about being transgender as a child. We all know who Shane Dawson is, right? If you've never even logged onto YouTube, you probably know who Shane Dawson is.
He's a very famous YouTuber, been around for a really long time.
Yeah, like since the beginning, an original. So Shane Dawson does this thing where he has a bunch of characters, like he dresses up as a woman sometimes, etc., etc. And he made this really cringeworthy point about transgenderism when in children. He said something along the lines of wrapping a towel around his head, and if his mother was a mother today, that she would have been like, oh, my son's a tranny, gotta go. He's gotta go get the transition done. Everything's gotta be done now. And I found that to be really problematic because that somehow assumes that Shane Dawson putting a towel on his head and pretending to be Shanae is somehow similar to Jazz Jennings.
The point he was trying to make, and perhaps this is biased, I'll be, frank, Shane is a really good friend of mine. So if it comes across as me defending him, it's, again, because I am. To me, I think the point he was trying to make was that a lot of trans people report, memories of being really young. And I did it. I was like 5 years old, putting the towel around my head and pretending I had long hair and whipping that shit. And that was me. And a lot of people talk about that a lot. It's like a meme at this point that trans kids do that. So I think that was more so the point. And he was speaking to the fact that a lot of parents now, and I feel this way too, leap to conclusions that the kid is trans because they exhibit certain behaviors. And I'll say this, my boyfriend has told me that when he was younger, he used to love to play with his mom's like beauty stuff, like earrings and makeup and stuff like that when he was like 5, 6 years old. And I agree that if he had a certain set of, radical leftist parents at that age, they might have jumped to conclusions that their kid was trans and set them on this path of transitioning. So I think that was the point he was trying to make.
And I understand that. Like, I'm with you, okay? But the thing that really rubbed me the wrong way is that this isn't even something that just happens with trans kids. I don't know about Jeff or anyone in the comments, but my straight cousin, who is like as straight as they come, I mean like straight, used to wear his mother's heels and play in her makeup and put on wigs, et cetera, et cetera. So this isn't just a thing that is strictly trans. And even Shane did it. So it's not. That's the point. Yeah, but putting on a wig or playing in your mother's clothing doesn't make you trans. Shane Dawson putting a towel on his head and pretending to be a girl doesn't make him trans. Jazz Jennings, sure, she put a towel on her head and she played in her mother's clothing, but when she was 6 years old, went into a bathroom and tried to cut her penis off. She, at 6 years old, was reiterating the fact to her parents that she was not a boy. She was a girl. She didn't want to wear a boy's clothes. She didn't want to be associated with boy things. So
but it sounds like you're agreeing with Shane then. You're agreeing with Shane's point that just because you dress up doesn't mean that he was trans. It doesn't mean he should transition.
Just let it get through a point.
Yeah, that I totally, like I said, I totally understand that. But Shane is somehow conflating being transgender with gender expression among children, and that's simply not the case. You can't conflate the two. You can't say I'm not trans because I'm a cis male now, and I used to play with girls' toys and dolls and play in my mother's clothing, and I didn't turn out trans. So maybe a lot of the kids who are trans now aren't trans, but it's not the same thing. Being trans and expressing your gender as a child is not the same thing, even as a child.
But I mean, I'm confused what your point is. It sounds like you agree with his point, which is that dressing up as a kid doesn't mean that you're trans. Like, that's exactly what I got from it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I got from it too. But
so were you like offended that it was like, are you trying?
No. I think you're missing the point that I'm making. So let's start over. Shane made a point about dressing up in female clothing, in his mother's clothing, putting on towels, pretending he was a girl, et cetera, right? This isn't a phenomenon that is exclusive to Shane. This isn't a phenomenon that's exclusive to trans kids before they transition. But the fundamental difference between Shane Dawson and, say, me or Jazz Jennings is that Shane Dawson didn't reiterate the fact to his mother that he was a girl, that Shane Dawson didn't want to chop off his penis when he was a toddler.
Okay, I see what you're saying now.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Okay. But I feel like you're kind of nitpicking. Like, I don't see.
Really?
Yeah, I do. I feel like, yeah, there's a difference in that maybe, trans kids typically dress up and do the same thing as Shane, but the difference is they'll tell their parents they're a girl, which is a thing, but I'm just not sure why it's like super important. To me, I understood his point. I think you did too.
No, I totally understood his point, but the point that I'm making is that the language is not healthy because it equates being transgender with expressing yourself as a child. And so let's just assume, right?
So you just find it like problematic.
No, not just problematic, but that it adds to this rhetoric that being transgender is a trend, the transgender thing. And let me just say outright, first of all, that I am aware of transgenders. I know the deal. I'm not
Who are
stupid.
some
I pay attention.
transgenders? Who are some transgenders that you think are on YouTube? Just curious.
I think are on YouTube, that we're getting into some messy
Let's name
waters.
names. Who cares? Let's name names.
I don't know any transgenders on YouTube. I'm gonna put that out there. I don't think anyone on YouTube is pretending to be trans for the trend of being trans. I'm just gonna say
What about Riley Dennis?
right now.
What about Riley Dennis?
Hold on, Riley Dennis had me blocked for, which is weird. Like, if anything, I'm on Riley's side. So she had me blocked for some reason for like months, and I had no idea what for. So I don't know anything about Riley Dennis. But I will say that I've been on Facebook for a while, and that I can name 5 people off the top of my head that were one point trans, and now they are not. Right? So I get the whole discussion about transgender being a trend. I totally understand. But Shane adds to that rhetoric by saying, adds actual trans people to that rhetoric by saying things like, well, I dressed up as a girl and I'm not trans, but that has nothing to do with actual trans people.
I think it has a lot to do with it, because I think that there are markers that people look for when determining if their kid is trans. And there are things that psychiatrists look for. Some of them are dressing up in the opposite gender's clothing. They're experimenting with makeup and stuff like that. Like, those are things.
Yeah, but it doesn't end there. Gender dysphoria doesn't just happen.
No, it doesn't end there. But what the point is, those are markers. And so what the point Shane was trying to make, which is a point that I've made many times, is that there are some parents out there who look for those, and they come to conclusions about their child without thinking that maybe this child is just going through a phase or just experimenting, whatever. Because like I said, my boyfriend talks about how he used to dress up with his mom's stuff and play with her makeup, and he grew up to be a fucking Marine, and like it wasn't a thing. So that's just my thing. I don't know. I think we're kind of nipping at this point. I don't know how much we could really talk more about this topic.
I just think that Shane equating playing in girls stuff and being transgender was counterproductive is really the point.
Okay. I mean, we'll agree to disagree. The next point you have written down is Wendy Williams' outrage culture. And I remember this statement. I'll give context. Shane told on the podcast, me and Shane talked about a recent Wendy Williams episode in which Wendy told, there was 2 trans people as guests on Wendy Williams' talk show. And Wendy Williams told one of them, "Oh, you look really real." Like, as in you look, like the gender you're trying to be. And I guess I didn't find anything wrong with it. And I thought it was just people being outraged for no reason, that people found offense in that. But I guess I see it differently.
I actually wrote that down in my notes, is that I partially agree with you, but I didn't write that when I sent it to you. And the reason why I partially agree with you is because I completely understand where Wendy Williams was coming from, right? Anyone who's thinking rationally could probably understand where Wendy Williams is coming from. We live in a binary society, right? And when Wendy Williams sees a trans woman on her show who looks like, your conventional cis woman, and she's shook, like, you got me. I'm there with you. I thought you were a real woman. But the reason why people took an issue with what she said, "You're giving me realness," is that it assumes that all women somehow look like your conventional cis woman. And that's simply not the case. I made an entire video. Sorry about the shameless self-plug, actually. I made an entire video because as a girl, we got into the talk about lesbianism and trans women dating lesbians, et cetera, et cetera. And
you're talking about Ariel Scarcelli, or?
Well, the video I'm referring to now was not about Ariel Scarcella, but that's also another video that I made about Ariel Scarcella, who is a mess and a half. But the point
I agree with her.
Really?
I did. And I thought it was unfair. I thought it was unfair that you called her human trash.
Okay.
To be honest.
Honestly, and the reason why I called her human trash is not because she thinks whatever she thinks, right? If you watch the video, I never call her trash because she doesn't want to sleep with trans women. I actually reiterate, not even just in that video multiple times, but for the entire 3 years that I've been saying anything to or about her, like in person or on Twitter or in the description of the video, it's never about the fact that she doesn't want to fuck trans women. It's never been about that. It's been about, for the last 3 years, educated trans people within the YouTube community and the world really have been trying to have a really educated discourse with Ariel Scarcella about her language in regard to womanhood and vaginas, et cetera, et cetera. And she hasn't been listening. Even if, let's just assume that she has been listening, right? She hasn't been taking it seriously. So when someone, even when cis women tell you that you're being sexist and misogynistic and reductive, you should probably take a step back and reevaluate where you're coming from. And so the conversation,
I think she's followed by, frankly, a ton of social justice warriors that I think freak out over fucking everything. That's my opinion. I've seen, the bouts that she's gotten into with people. I've never seen really a legitimate criticism against her, to be honest. I think she's completely right. I feel like people really did, they talked about how she invalidates trans people because she doesn't want to fuck one. Like, that was a huge thing.
But she actually invalidated people on video with Jaclyn Glenn. Sorry, Jaclyn Hill is a makeup YouTuber.
That video was not, because they said there's only 2 genders.
Yeah, that's actually one of the topics, isn't it, on our list? Is it?
Yeah, it is, but I don't mind jumping around. Yeah. I don't see how they invalidated people. I mean, there are 2 genders. Like, that's just the thing.
It's the next God, that's gonna too. These are going to naturally blend together for sure.
Yeah, that's going
to start something, I'm sure. But,
the point about the Wendy Williams outrage culture, and even to your point about Ariel Scarcella, I'm breaking up. Is that just me?
I'm okay.
Okay, well, anyway, the point about the outrage culture and what William Williams said, I don't particularly take issue with Wendy Williams. Like I said before in public and in my video, I'm pretty chill. Like, you called me an SJW in the title of the video, which I found so funny because I am by no stretch an SJW. Anyone who knows me will tell you I'm not an SJW.
I mean, that was my personal.
Yeah,
that
I
was
know.
my perception, because you've tweeted things like, I'm part of a tragic. Let me find the tweet. Hold on. I'll just find the tweet. You said something about how I'm part of like a tragic group of queer people. I can't find it verbatim.
It was something. Yeah, it was something about pandering to the cis and like heteronormative society in regard to ideas about gender, basically.
I remember you said that I'm part of a tragic group of queer people who invalidate other people's identities, like, to get brownie points from like people who hate me. Like, very typical.
Something like that.
Very typical stuff. Like, I'm just gonna say that's such a typical response. It's like a meme at this point. Everyone can agree. Like, in my comments, that's a meme at this point when it comes to me.
Sure, and to the point of the outrage culture, like I said, I agree with you. I'm really chill. Like that conversation I had with a particular lesbian who is not Ariel Scarcella. Like, she was like, I personally wouldn't date a trans woman. That's fine. Like, I'm not gonna go to bed and cry because you won't let me finger you, right? I don't care. And the fact is that a lot of trans women actually do not care that cis women want that's us. The point about outrage culture or Wendy Williams saying things like realness isn't that, as personally I don't take issue with it, but it assumes that women are one way, that women are defined by a certain feature or a set of features, and you get into a slippery slope when saying things like realness or I don't want to date trans women because blank, and that's just really at the root of it misogynistic and sexist and reductive of women. And that's exactly what the patriarchy wants us to do.
Okay, so you think that it's insulting to define women as having vaginas?
Oh, most definitely. And before I answer, I want you to tell me why it's not offensive to define women by their genitalia, by their breasts, by their vaginas, whatever else have you.
I mean, biologically speaking, vaginas are female. It's a female body part. I don't see any problem with I mean, like, we're talking about trans people. We're talking about such a small fucking group of people. Like, yes, if you really look into the nitty gritty of it, like, there are people who call themselves women who have penises. My fucking driver's license says female. My birth certificate says female. I have a dick. But I don't have a problem with people defining women as having vaginas because, first of all, no one needs to know whether I have a dick anyways. I know I just said it. But, like, on a real life basis, not internet, I don't see an issue with it. I'm not offended by it. I'm just not. I think that's what makes the most sense. Like, I see activists saying that you shouldn't call pregnant people pregnant women. You should say birthing individuals. That's kind of like language policing that I feel, and I've made many videos about this, really turns people off from trans people in general. So I don't like the nitpicky stuff. I don't like it.
But I don't find it to be nitpicky or language policing because, like you said, if we refer to vaginas and breasts as a biological thing in a very literal sense, yes, people with female chromosomes have vaginas and breasts, right? But the point is that not all women have these things, even cis women. So when Wendy Williams
I don't
says
know.
things,
You know, I'll just say this. Maybe this is like controversial. It's like the easiest way in social interactions to just call myself a woman, because if I said anything else, people would be really fucking confused. And if I got pulled over and my driver's license said male, the cop would be really fucking confused. But on a technical level, I don't feel like I'm a woman. I mean, I know, like, internally I feel like I should live as a woman because that's where my head's at, but I don't consider myself to be, you know, a true woman, a biological woman. I think at most I'm sort of living my life as one because that's what feels comfortable to me. But I'm not going to get up on some high horse because I hear a woman defined as having a vagina, because vaginas are female organs.
But that's the thing, though. I made a point in my video to Ariel Scarcella, the last one that you mentioned, that seeing women being the point was that lesbianism had nothing to do with genitalia, right? You're not a lesbian because you're attracted to vaginas or boobs. You're a lesbian because you're attracted to women. And I made that point because there are a lot of biological cisgendered women who don't have a lot of the parts that Ariel Scarcella is talking about, right? Ariel Scarcella and people like her like to equate vaginas and boobs with womanhood, but there are a lot of women, cis women included, who don't have vaginas, or if they do have vaginas, they don't lead to wounds, or if they do have vaginas and they do lead to wounds, they probably function atypically or not at all. So when you say things like I'm a lesbian because I'm attracted to boobs and vaginas, or you're giving me realness because you see a trans woman who has a set of boobs and possibly a vagina between her legs, you're reducing women to their genitals, and it becomes an issue because, like I said, not even a lot of cis women don't have a lot of these things.
Does that mean I'm a lesbian?
Yes.
Oh, sweet. Right on.
Quiet, Jeff. Just kidding. Here's the thing.
So the point was, so I don't know about how you witnessed the outrage culture with the Wendy Williams thing, but as far as I've seen it from my friends like Benji and Lily, you know, all these educated people on these topics, we never took issue with the fact that she said, "You're giving me realness," because I'm super gay. I understand. I watch RuPaul's Drag Race. I know what that means. But the point that we're making is that a lot of people don't understand this language. And to a lot of people, this language is offensive and wrong. And even sometimes to me, because when you say things like realness or you equate womanhood to vaginas and breasts, you're reducing people to their genitals. And when you say things like, I'm a lesbian and because I'm attracted to vaginas, that assumes that you have to have these things to be a woman. And even cis women who don't have vaginas, are they not women? Like,
it's not that. It's just like sex organs matter. Like, I would never date, quote unquote, a man with a vagina, as in I would never date a transgender man who had a vagina. I just never would.
Okay.
Sex organs matter. So if someone's classifying themselves as a lesbian because they like the boobs and vagina, I don't know. I feel like you and the people who criticize her for that are just searching for things to be offended about. That's how I feel. I don't think it's just common sense. If you're a lesbian, you want to fuck a woman, and you definitely prefer she has a vagina and tits. Otherwise, you're fucking a Barbie, some kind of like androgynous nothing.
And that's totally fine. Like I said in the video, I understand her attraction to vaginas and breasts, but her reducing people to their genitals. And more to the point, she's
But I
gone
don't think
on
it's
to
a
say
reduction.
now
I
after
don't think
people.
it's a reduction, though. I don't think it's a reduction. I think acknowledging that it's part of someone isn't the same thing as saying you are a vagina, you are a set of tits.
Right. So then what about, let's say let's have the same argument. I'm a cis lesbian born with a vagina and breasts. I wish, right? I'm a cis lesbian, and I say something like, I'm a lesbian because I'm attracted to boobs and vaginas, right? I'm a lesbian because I'm attracted to boobs and vaginas, and that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly valid. So what if say a trans person comes along, right, and that trans person does indeed have breasts, does indeed have vaginas, and I change the story. Well, I'm attracted. The story, that's the preference from, it goes from being I'm attracted to boobs and vagina to I'm attracted to certain kinds of boobs with certain kinds of vaginas. So if you are a cis lesbian or any other kind of person who,
well, let's keep it real. A trans woman can never have a vagina. You can have a womb that resembles a vagina, but you can never have a functioning vagina. So to me, I think if someone is attracted to a vagina and not a surgical vagina, not a wound that resembles a vagina, I don't find that to be problematic at all.
So you said something
the same way that for me dating a man, if I find a transgender man who's extremely attractive in every sense, I still would not date them because I want a functioning real penis. I know that's going to be talked about in the chat. I want a functioning real penis. I would not date a trans guy.
That's exactly the point. Where does functioning end for you? Like, when does a vagina become a functioning vagina? When does a penis become a functioning penis? There are trans men with surgical penises who can ejaculate. Is that where it ends for you, or do you mean like a cis penis?
It doesn't function like a real penis. There are situations where you have to like do something manually to get it hard, and it's very different. I know you know it's different. Same thing with vaginas. A surgical vagina cannot lubricate itself.
Okay, but so can a lot of cis vaginas that are functioning.
I mean, I guess technically if you have lubrication issues, but it's just the same thing. I feel like we're pretending that a surgical wound that resembles a vagina is the same thing as a vagina. And it's not.
Have you seen a neovagina? Because I have. You have. You can't. I mean, I don't know whose vagina you've seen, but of the surgical vaginas I've seen, Eros Garcella will even tell you of the ones that she's seen. They look very much like normal cis vaginas.
But yeah, okay. I'll say it this way, and my boyfriend's gonna kill me. My boyfriend, for instance, says that he would be unattracted if I had a surgical vagina. And I find that most men feel that way about trans women. I feel like most men who want to date trans women, it's not because they have a vagina, because then why not date biological? You know what I mean? Like, it's not the same thing. And it's a lot of people, including me, feel like sex wouldn't be the same with it. A lot of times it doesn't look the same. And it's not me putting down people who have it or reducing people to their vaginas. Again, I think you're just nitpicking. That's just how I feel. And I feel like this topic in particular is just like going nowhere.
I'm actually like, I'm never at a loss for words. But
if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
It feels like some of the dysfunction in this conversation is coming down to this is by and large a hypothetical questioning of what someone, a imaginary someone, and what their preferences might be if they do like vaginas, or they only specifically want one type of vagina, a functioning biological vagina, a surgical vagina, whatever. This is largely ephemeral like what if sort of thing, as used to try and help define an entirely different set of talking points. So I mean, I'd say either pull it back or move on either way. But you two are both doing fantastic at this debate, so kudos to you both.
Do you want to move on? I feel like
I just want to clarify.
just for me to like sum up this section, I feel like you feel like it's a problem to define women as having a vagina. I feel like it just makes sense 99.7% of the time. That's just as far as I'm going with it. And I feel like we're going so nitty gritty into it. And the fact is, it makes sense and it works 99.
I just want to say that people were outraged by what really Wendy Williams says and things like Eris Corsella says, because it's reductive in terms of feminism, and which I know you don't believe in, and misogyny and things like that, because
We're having a technical issue.
we believe
Blair's frozen.
there's frozen.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, am I back?
Yep, there you are.
Okay.
So I don't know if you probably didn't hear that. But I wanted to make the point that people were outraged by what Wendy Williams said and things like what Eris Corsella says, because it assumes that women are a certain way, and those ideas are from, you know, basic feminism and things like that are misogynistic and reductive, and that's why people found an issue with it.
Okay, and I just feel like that word misogynistic is being used way too liberally, no pun intended. We can move on though.
Okay, sure.
So the next one that we have is the two gender debate. Oh God, this one's gonna be a doozy. And my point that cultures don't create genders.
Yeah, I want to know what you mean by that, because that's really interesting. Cultures don't create genders. Please.
Okay, so obviously the dictionary defines gender and sex differently, and gender is reflective of cultural expectations, to be short, of men and women. But I don't feel like that means that they create the gender. I feel like culture holds up certain ideals and expectations of people within a certain gender. But I think that comes from biology in almost all cases. I don't feel like it comes from culture springing it up out of nowhere.
Okay, so I had a question for you, because someone made a defense of you. This post wasn't public; it was on my personal Facebook page. I said something about gender being in terms of the male and female binary being a concoction of Judeo-Christianity, and made a point to say that your idea was based in Judeo-Christianity, simply because, not saying that I assume that you're a Christian or anything like that, but because this Western idea of gender that we have is indeed a Judeo-Christian philosophy. So what was the question? Is indeed a Judeo-Christian philosophy. So why then do you think that there are only two genders, considering that Judeo-Christian philosophy, which is brand new, like 2,000 or so years, why there's only two genders, if gender in the binary is something that's brand new?
Gender in the binary is not something brand new. Gender in the binary is
and why do you say that?
Because there are two genders, there are two gender roles. There's no third gender. That's just a fact. Biologically, there's male and female. And then there are people who have intersex conditions. That doesn't make them a third gender. It means they have complications at birth. But there are two genders.
Well,
this is the hiccup we're going to have, because I know that you're not going to feel that way. And so that's why it's so frustrating to debate the two gender thing, because there are people who just believe there are more than two and people who don't.
No, see, but that's the thing. I'm not, like I said, I'm not your Milo Stewart, right? I'm not going to just say that I have like lists and lists here, but the point that I was making is that, like I said, you made a very good point that, and this is where a lot of people get confused. You conflated gender with biological sex, and these things are not the same thing.
Well, the reason I conflate them is because I feel like separating gender from sex is kind of like separating the ocean from waves. I feel like they're so interconnected. There's almost no point.
That was such a good analogy. First of all, props to you. But that's simply just not based in any sort of fact whatsoever.
Well, the reason I say that is because when it comes to gender and gender roles, they're biologically constructed by and large. There are certain aspects of gender that are created by society, of course, you know, certain colors being attributed to certain genders, pink and blue. Those things change over time, and they have changed over time. However, the mainframe typical gender roles have remained constant through almost all of human civilization, and in places throughout the early points of human civilization that had no contact with each other.
Where
the
do
fact
you
that there's never been a society in which women naturally take the role of a man in this society, isolated from every other society on earth? Do you understand what I'm saying? Because if gender was socially constructed before all these societies came into contact with each other, before there was boats and fucking transportation and people could leave countries and nations, you would have isolated incidents of gender roles being swapped because of gender. If society creates them, then it's kind of just whatever society wants, right? No, it's biologically constructed.
Right. So, okay, that's fair. That's your opinion. But then I ask you, where do you get that information? Where have you ever seen in any reputable medical diary or post by a medical professional, an anthropologist maybe, that says that there are only two genders? Because that's simply not true. You can find it in science blogs, Medical Daily, The Telegraph, et cetera, et cetera. If I were to set you in a room with psychologists,
what are the other genders then?
I don't have any specific notes written down, but I can give you examples if you want to look them up. Anyone in the comments, et cetera, et cetera. The Mahu of Hawaii, for example. Just actually no.
So you're
just
talking
search
about things like Two-Spirit. You're talking about stuff like that, right?
Sure, that Two-Spirit will be one of them. Yeah.
Okay, so that is just, certain people that were Two-Spirits in those cultures were just like, they held like a slightly different gender role and they were seen as like royalty among people. That doesn't make them biologically some other gender. And I know you think that,
and you keep saying
gender is not attached to biology at all. That is the hiccup we're gonna have. But
I'm gonna read this for you. This is a quote from The Telegraph. It says, "Nearly every continent since the dawn of recorded history on every civilization since the dawn of recorded history on almost every continent has recognized, revered, and integrated more than two genders." And this more than two gender debate is not new by any stretch of the word. This is something like feminism that we've been talking about for going on 6 decades, right? If I were to sit you, this is the point that I was trying to make. If I were to sit you in a room with psychologists and psychiatrists and biologists and anthropologists and people who study these things, and all of these educated, experienced people were to tell you that there are indeed more than two genders, and there have indeed been more than two genders since before the dawn of Judeo-Christianity, when the two gender idea was first introduced, you still wouldn't believe that.
No, I know what
these things are fact.
I know what you're talking about now, because I remember being in my first semester in college. I actually did a paper about this because I was wildly different than how I think now. All of these, Two-Spirits, and in different ancient cultures, there are people who are considered a different gender. They were never biologically something different than just a male or a female. It was just that culture, that particular culture held them in a different regard and saw them differently. For instance, trans people like you and I have been around since the beginning. We've just had different names. And even sitting here now, what's the name for us now? Transsexuals, transgender. That doesn't make us a third gender. That doesn't make us a separate gender. You and I are male. We are one of the two. And we can, choose to portray or live as the opposite gender, but you and I are male. And when it comes to Two-Spirits, for instance, just one example of Two-Spirits, one of these, culturally held separate genders in history, they were either male or female. In fact, I think they were always male.
Right. But like I said earlier, you're conflating, like I said, and you even recognize that you're conflating gender and biological sex, and these two things are not the same thing. Any medical professional will tell you that gender and biological sex are not correlated in any way whatsoever. They're mutually exclusive. So why do you think then that it's appropriate for you to spread misinformation by saying that there are only two genders?
No, I'm pretty sure it's any social science field that will say that gender is completely separate from sex. I don't think you're gonna be able to find it in a biology book. No, I'm not crying. I'm sniffing because I'm sick.
Something that might also help too is if the two of you were willing to examine how you perceive how our society determines gender versus personality, and what those distinctions might be, especially in the field of
Yes.
something like social sciences. It's an important distinction, at least if you're going to talk openly about it, to make that distinction,
Yes, because I feel like those two things a lot of times are conflated as well.
And you two might
personality.
you two might have a totally different perspective on that dynamic, and that might actually help bridge the gap in conversation.
Okay.
Would you like to go first?
You can go.
So I was saying that you are conflating this idea of biological sex with gender, and this idea that we have of the male and female binary being somehow in tune with each other, I guess, from birth, is brand new. Like, this is new. Trans people being the worst of the worst is new, right? Gay people, for whatever reason, this, I mean, it's
the best time throughout human history to be trans. Can we agree on that? I guess we can't.
In the sense of what?
There's never been access to transitioning and drugs and surgery.
Well, that's really
before the last 100 years.
That's really that's sort of myopic, because our
not really. I mean, it's very integral to living your life and being happy, is it not?
Right, but that doesn't have anything to do with the core argument about there being more than two genders.
No, you're saying that it's a new thing that trans people are demonized. I was responding to that specifically. I don't believe that it is. I feel like it's the best kind of trans. Because it's just not true. Trans people have been treated horribly throughout history. Same with homosexuals. And the reason I say that is because they were often conflated. It's actually a new thing that people differentiate transsexuals from homosexuals. Part of it being that you're able to transition and therefore you're distinct from gay people. No one would mistake me for a gay person because of that. You understand what I'm saying?
I do, but it's not true. Because
Why?
Because the gender binary was introduced by Judeo-Christian philosophy recently, some 2,000 years ago. Before the onset, this was the point, before the onset of before Christ was born in his little dirty farmhouse in Bethlehem, gender was a free thing. We didn't care who slept with who. We didn't care who or what. We, like I said, revered and recognized multiple genders. Before the onset of Christianity, being trans, being gay wasn't wrong.
How do you know that? So before Christianity and the Bible,
because Judeo-Christianity is the first monotheistic religion in the world, right? And with that, it brought a bunch of new ideas with it. For example, let's just say paganism in general.
Even cave people had gender roles. It's been two genders from the start. I don't think it was free and there were third genders and fucking transvestites running around before the Bible, and all of a sudden it was horrible to do it after that.
But gender roles don't have anything to do with gender identity, though.
I think they do. I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
I
think gender roles shape gender identity.
Just on a note for the history, classic Judaism, pre-Christianity, there was two other terms that were added into gender, which was androgynous and tumtum. Androgynous was obviously an androgynous person that exhibits both male and female sexual characteristics, and tumtum is indeterminate or obscured, but they were both hinged upon effectively a binary. But I do know Hinduism, which predates even that, did have some interesting things, but I'm not very well versed in the gender discussion on Hinduism.
Yeah, neither am I. No, I just know that this idea of this bullet point is about is that this two gender argument, before anything else, before it being you might not like this word because it's a social justice word, and I understand that, before it being exclusionary, right, before it being sort of erasing, before any of that, this idea of the gender binary, of the male and the female, that the man is supposed to procreate with women to make children and save the hut, and that's it. This is something that's new. It was brought about because of Judeo-Christian philosophies. More than cultures all around the world before the onset of Judeo-Christianity recognized more than two genders. And by saying that gender and biological sex are the same thing is going against decades and decades of science.
I think what you're talking about is that people like you and I, trans people and gender non-conforming people, have just been around since the start, and different societies have had different names to describe them. I think that's what you're talking about.
No, it's totally not, because you and I have different ideologies when it comes to gender, right? I'm not talking about strictly male to female trans people and female to male trans people. There are the people, whatever, of Siberia, right? These people who recognized a third gender identity. Like this isn't a new phenomenon, is what the point is. And by saying things like there are only two genders just simply is not true. And you got really like flustered when I said misinformation, because no one likes to be told that what they believe is wrong, or that what they're saying isn't true, right?
It's not.
But why is it not misinformation though? If I've given you point after point after point of this, that, and the third, if I've told you that, every medical professional ever will tell you that there are more than three genders. The point you say that there aren't more than three genders.
The point after
how is that not misinformation?
The point that you stated is that Christianity made up the idea of two genders, which I find totally false. I'd be interested if you just send me your sources on that. I mean, I have no way to confirm that. I think that's kind of ridiculous. I will say.
Go ahead.
Okay. I forgot what I was saying. What was that? Can you repeat your question just one more time? Because you got me responding to two different.
She was asking how that was misinformation, or she was saying that was misinformation.
I was saying that that's misinformation, and because at least from the research that I've done, it doesn't stand to be true in any sense of the word. So why do you find that to not be misinformation? Okay. Why do you find it appropriate to
let me completely shift towards your side and separate gender from sex, okay? Gender is still defined as cultural expectations of males and females. In fact, let me just pull up the definition so we don't just talk about it. Let me pull it up. The state of being male or female, typically used with reference to social and cultural differences rather than biological ones. So in that sense, yes, we're not necessarily talking about biology, although I think there is an argument to be made that these cultural expectations are a derivative from biology. We can talk about that next. But even gender is defined as being the state of being male or female.
Right.
And what it means within a society to be male or female. There are still two genders and gender roles. There are male gender roles and female gender roles.
Right.
And throughout society, there have been people who play with gender expression, and to do certain things to their bodies to resemble, something else, even to resemble someone who's androgynous. And society has had different names to describe these individuals. But that doesn't mean that they are, in fact, objectively a different gender. It just means that society calls them something different.
Right, and that's a fair argument. But the point, like I said, it goes right back to the Judeo-Christianity thing. That definition of gender is based on the Western idea of what it is to be gender and what gender is, and what.
I mean, that's how it's always been in the Middle East as well, though. It's not just Western. That's global.
What is Western? What is? You brought up a good. I'm gonna start over. You brought up a good point about the definition of gender, and that's a perfectly fair argument in your favor. But then I ask you, that definition of gender is the Western definition of gender, and where does Western society come from? What are Western principles? I think Judeo-Christianity.
Okay, but I think your argument that Judeo-Christianity is the reason that we have a binary is inherently flawed, because if you look at the Middle East, which is obviously largely Islamic, in fact, completely Islamic, they have the concept of two genders there as well, and they always have.
Okay, but the Middle East...
The entire world, for every corner of the earth, has always defined gender as being two things. What's new is people pretending there's more than two genders. That's what's new.
No, Islam is an Abrahamic religion, so Christians, people who are
Muslim, but you're
Muslim,
talking about it in the context of Western society.
Got to pace it a little bit
Right.
better. Pace it a little bit better.
Okay,
So,
you're talking about it within the context of Western society, and obviously the Middle East does not adhere to the cultural standards of Western society, and yet still goes by two genders.
but the Middle East, the philosophies of Islamic cultures are based in Abrahamic theology, which is Judeo-Christianity.
Yeah.
So the point is that you try to like make this point about it not being just a Western thing and used Islam as an example, and that probably wasn't the best thing for your argument because Islam and Muslims, Christians, and Jews all worship the same God.
I understand that, but the point I'm trying to make is that every corner of the earth has always defined gender as being two. Just because there's been words to describe gender does not mean that society will ever really recognize three genders or more than two genders.
There's a plane. You might want to want to backtrack and restate, Blaire.
The whole thing?
Yeah, just that last sentence that you were saying.
Okay. The point I was making was that every corner of the earth, Western society, Middle East, everywhere, has always defined gender as being two things, two genders. And just because throughout history there's been words to describe gender nonconforming people doesn't mean it's a third gender. To me, it seems to be something that you are attributing to by insisting that because these words existed to describe gender nonconforming people, that means society has, historically recognized more than two genders. And even if they did, that doesn't make it valid, because ancient societies have always been wrong about a lot of things. They've always believed a lot of incorrect, unscientific things. So I don't think it's the best argument to say that in ancient societies, they thought there were more than two genders. It's like, okay, but they didn't really have science back then either.
I'll step in real quick just for I've been looking up some basic data sets. Data sets makes me sound way smarter than I am. Some basic information, while you ladies have been talking, and there are numerous examples, especially of animism, worshiping cultures that did express different types of gender binaries. There is also Hinduism, but also both Shinto and Taoism over in the Far East are gender binary. However, they've always been, historically speaking, very progressive. Taoism especially believes that perfect balance, yin and yang, it's in the very basis of it. The balancing of male and female energies is actually fundamental to that belief system, which is just interesting stuff. So I'll step back.
Yeah, it is interesting, but I still, even if what you're saying is true, that historically societies have recognized more than two genders, that doesn't make it scientifically valid. We've come a long way. There's a lot of things that ancient societies consider to be true that are not.
Okay,
so
and that's fine. So let's move on from that and let's get through it, right? Let's just get to the.
I knew that would be the biggest. I knew that would be the biggest hill to get over.
Yeah, let's forget the ancientness of gender, right? Let's not even discuss ancient people in regard to gender. If I were to put you in a room, like I said, once again, of all of these scientific people, and they were to tell you, based on studies that they did in the here and now, that there are indeed more than two genders. In fact, there was an article that why didn't I get this? There's an article that I read recently that that scientists are doing research that suggests that sexuality, biological sexuality itself, isn't binary, that it's more of a spectrum, right? So if all of these people are to tell you, right, if all of these people who are smarter than you or I, educated more than you or I in these fields, were to tell you that there are more than two genders. If
you were to sit me down with people who were able to scientifically prove it to me, then obviously I would concede the same way.
Right, and that's the point, because it's out there.
But it's the same as if I were to bring up anything that you don't right now believe in, me say, well, listen, if I had people to sit in a room with you and prove it to you, would you concede? Yes. If you're a rational person, then yes, you would concede if someone proved it to you.
But the point, that's exactly the point. The point is that the information is out there. All it takes is a quick Google search to know that there are more than two genders. All it takes is reading.
Listen, I've done a lot of videos on this. I have never, ever, 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 ever seen scientific evidence of more than two genders. Even people who consider intersex to be more than two genders, it's not.
All right. I guess
it's a birth disorder.
I guess we're just gonna have to. What's that? What's that term?
I've seen very educated people say that gender is separate from sex, which is partly true. But I've never seen evidence of more than two genders. I mean, if you want to link those to me and we can do that later, and
sure, I'll definitely do that.
I've never seen it, and that's coming from someone who's done many videos on this topic.
Okay,
on the concept of gender being socially constructed, on the concept of there being more than two genders. I don't make videos without research. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Okay, that's fair.
So the next bullet point, there are 2 bullet points left. This one is social versus medical transition, and I'll give you the floor since it was your issue with me.
The context of this is in regard to the video, and I probably should have written more information down. Do you remember the conversation you had with Train about social transition? Oh, I think that you maybe it was you or maybe it was Shane that you took issue with people who transition socially. Was that the issue? Like you didn't deem social transition as valid or something? Please correct me if I'm wrong.
I remember the context. I was talking about a transgender on YouTube. I don't know if it was Riley Dennis or Milo Stewart, but people who feel like it's enough to socially transition and expect everyone around you to just adhere to it and recognize you for what you want to be. And my point is that realistically, it's not. That you can't navigate through society as a woman if you're someone like a Riley Dennis who refuses to in any way, assume the appearance of a woman, assume the gender roles of a woman. To me, it's kind of like going to China and refusing to learn Chinese. Like choosing to be a woman and not learning how to fill that role, look like one. It doesn't translate into how you're actually going to navigate through life. It's not realistic.
That's another interesting point because you said look like one, and again it goes back to this idea of misogyny and feminism that women are supposed to look a certain way and act a certain way, and I get where you're coming from to the point of people like say Riley Dennis or Milo Stewart who called me a transphobe, which is in itself kind of crazy.
I mean, girl, if you dish it out, you can take it. I've seen you. I mean, you've called me transphobic, and you've called me.
Have I called you transphobic?
You called me transphobic before. We've had a lot of Twitter interactions. I think you called me Islamophobic. I mean, you throw them out, girl. You got to take them too.
I definitely do remember calling you Islamophobic because that video, Islam apologists are cancer, et cetera, those things are indeed Islamophobic. But I don't think I've ever called you a transphobe. I don't think I've ever called anyone a transphobe, really. Because like things like racist, I don't throw that word around. Transphobe, I'm pretty sure I've never called you a transphobe. Ariel Scarcella, I'm pretty sure I've never said that word. And I may be wrong, but just like as I know myself now, those aren't words that I throw out there. But in regard,
okay, well, since I don't have a screenshot anyways, and just forget it.
That's fine. But I'm not saying I didn't do that. I'm just saying it doesn't seem like something I would do anyway. What were we talking about? Social transition and the point about social transition, and to your point, that's fair. Right? Like I said in the beginning of this thing, we do live in a binary society. So Milo Stewart called me a transphobe because I made a meme about him. And you know how Milo Stewart does this thing, and not one, not two, not three, not four, like multiple videos where he says he loves being a gender confusion, right? You've seen that. That's not something I've made up. Like that's something that he practices.
Okay.
Right. And so I talked about this, and I was like, and much to your point, I said, Milo, if you are a biological female and you go out in a dress with your tits out and makeup and people see you, we live in a binary society, so you're going to be perceived as someone who is a woman. And if you lash out in that way, then it brings negative attention back to trans people. But more to the point, with social transition, is it just with people? Because I think this one was really more of a question that I had for you than like something to argue with you about. But with your point with social transition, like, does it stop at people who like don't resemble the gender they're trying to conform to? Like say Ryan Casada, right? Ryan Casada, I don't know if you know, is a transgender YouTuber and a musician, right? And Ryan Casada looks like your typical binary male, right? If I had not watched Ryan Casada before, I would never have known that he's trans. But Ryan Casada only transitioned socially. So does your I guess apprehension to social transition stop there, and only with people like Riley J. Dennis who don't make any confirming like surgeries? Or
it's not about apprehension. It's about me just being a realist and saying that if you make no attempt to fill the role of a woman, be it physically or the gender role at all, how do you expect anyone to recognize you that way? If I sat here and never did anything to attempt to transition, no hormones, no procedures, no anything that would make me look like a woman, no one would recognize me as such. And it's just common sense. It's just me a matter of saying that.
Right. And that's, I think.
And I understand that there are some people who, try as they might, will never achieve the stereotypical expectations of what a woman should look like. And that is what it is. However, it's just the point of expecting people around you to kind of be in your head and in your reality when you make no attempt at doing anything about your dysphoria, if you supposedly have it.
And right, and I think that's the point, by assuming that people are supposed to look a certain way, that and I assume this is what you believe, that trans women are supposed to get hormones and do whatever they can to the best of their ability to pass, which is a word that I dislike a lot, to pass as a cis woman. It assumes that, again, it's about feminism and misogyny. It assumes that all women look the same. There are plenty of cis women who look just like Riley Dennis. Am I wrong?
Yes, I've never seen a cis woman that looks like Riley.
You've never seen a cis woman with secondary male sex characteristics?
I mean, listen, manly women and feminine men exist. I think the fact that
it totally goes beyond being just feminine or manly, though, because those things are.
No, it does. I have never seen a woman with Adam's apple the size of Riley Dennis's.
I've seen women. I don't know. I don't know about Jeff. I've seen women with beards. I've seen women with Adam's apples.
Yes, it's a thing.
I've seen.
It's a thing, but you're speaking of anomalies. Like what percentage of women out here are walking around with full beards?
Right, but why? That's exactly the point. Why are they anomalies? Why is a woman with a beard an anomaly? Why is a woman who's
because there's not many that exist. It's just not a thing. Most women cannot grow a full beard, so they are inherently anomalies. The same way that someone born with 11 toes is going to be an anomaly. Most women can't grow beards,
and that's very true. But the point, like I said, that's true. But the point is that there are women who do. There are women who look frankly, like Riley J. Dennis. Okay, no offense, honestly.
And those women who are born women, but for, God really fucked them over and they look completely like men, those people probably assume they're men. In the same way, people probably just assume that Riley Dennis all the time is a man, because Riley hasn't done a single thing to transition. Riley thinks that slapping on some shitty winged eyeliner is transitioning. And I'm sorry, but that's just being logical. If I was in an interaction with Riley and Riley straight up told me, call me she, I'm a nice person, and I'd probably do it. If I was on the street walking past Riley and I bumped into Riley on accident, I'd say, sorry, sir. That'd be my natural instinct. So my point is just about natural instincts. I think that, there's a lot of discussion of misgendering. I think 90% of the time it's unintentional. I really do.
Yeah.
Because
you made a really good point.
If we want to be real, most trans women go out into the world and don't pass. That's how I feel.
Sure. I don't want to confirm that because I'm not about to have my ass reamed on Twitter for that. But
I know you don't like the word pass, but it is a thing.
Yeah, I don't particularly, because anyway.
I will say you do have at least one bearded lesbian in the stream, so
Do we really?
Oh my god.
Okay.
He's not being serious.
what was I saying? Social transition, Riley J. Dennis, and that like the point about anomalies. And I guess the question I have for you is that do you think? Because I know personally, like we're not there yet, right? We're not in a post-gender society yet.
Nor do I think that would be like I don't consider that a goal.
No,
Like I don't. No, I think gender roles are
like
a healthy aspect
like
of a function.
intrinsic to human existence. Like we need gender roles.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I think, there's been studies that have shown that relationships that adhere to not necessarily hardline traditional gender roles, but in general are, set in their gender roles, the man and the woman, those relationships last longer and they're happier and they tend to live a lot more and just be happier. And I think that that's a microcosm for society as a whole.
Okay, that's fair. And so I guess for the last thing for this this bullet point is that the point that I was making about social transition is mainly again a point about feminism and misogyny and assuming that women are supposed to be a certain way.
Well, I mean, to that I would just say life isn't fair, and there are like life isn't fair. There are expectations. When you walk out the house, you can't walk out in a fucking what's that thing that gay men wear that like
A gap.
covers their like covers their dick but not their ass? Chaps. You can't just walk out of the house in assless chaps and have people and expect people to respect you. You know what I'm saying? Like it's a weird analogy. I'm sorry, I'm exhausted right now. But you know what I'm saying? Like
We all have a good analogy. I get it.
yeah, in the same way, if you can't expect someone to call you a woman if you walk out the house with a 6-inch beard and fucking shoulders from, the US to Africa and fucking walking around, smoking a cigarette. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, sure.
it's just not realistic.
Yeah, and I guess why is it not realistic is what I can't wrap my head around because again, not all women look the same. Not all women.
No, not all women look the same, but most women look like women.
All right.
Most women look, even if they're not really trying, look feminine. And most men, even if they're not really trying, look masculine. Of course, there are anomalies, but society is not going to hold you to the expectation of an anomaly. It's going to hold you to the expectation of everyone else.
All right.
You know what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying. I'm not going to agree though.
Okay. Why though? I mean,
because like I said, it's this idea that the cis female body is the end all be all first, and then second that all cis female bodies look the same when they don't. And again, it's an argument about feminism and about misogyny that
they all look generally the same. Like, yeah, you can find women who don't look like women, but most look like women.
When you mean cis women when you say that, right?
Yeah, and I guess trans women too. Like I said, most trans women don't look like women.
Oh, all right.
That's just being real. So the last and final, that means the same thing. I'm really tired, you guys. I am incredibly sick.
You're hanging in there. You're doing okay.
Like you can probably tell I'm fading at this point. I woke up like so deathly ill this morning, and last night it was even worse. But yeah. So the last bullet point that we have is suicide, and you put in parentheses and other things among trans people. So what do you mean by that?
I also you did. I'm gonna try to remember this. Do you remember the context that you were talking about with? I think I remember it, and I like halfway wrote it down, but my handwriting is like a child's. You said something about trans people being more likely to commit suicide, and that's like everyone knows that, right? But the reason that you gave for that was something along the lines of, I think it had to do with transition regret, and I may be wrong, but I think that's why I wrote it down because you brought up the
I think what I said was imagine permanently altering your body. This is just me guessing. Again, this was like, I think an hour-long podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember everything exactly as I said it. I probably should have
Right.
watched it beforehand, or we both probably should have watched it beforehand. I think what I was saying was, imagine permanently altering your body and then realizing you made a huge mistake. That can only severely depress a person. And I could see how that could contribute to people wanting to kill themselves. If you had a pair of tits on your chest that you didn't want there, wouldn't you be depressed about it?
Yeah, sure, but that's like, I don't honestly. I've never heard that argument about why trans
You just
people.
did.
Why? Yeah, it's new to me. I've never heard the argument about trans people. And maybe I misheard you, but I've never heard the argument about trans people, that the rates being so high of suicide with trans people because of.
Well, there are a lot of reasons. I don't think it's just because of that. I think I probably listed that as an example, but that's not the only reason. Obviously,
Okay.
there are a lot of things that contribute to. I mean, I think it's common knowledge that the suicide rates among the trans community are exceptionally high. And like I said, there are a lot of reasons for that. There are kids who get kicked out of their homes because they come out as trans. There
Okay,
are.
yeah, that's what I was gonna ask you. I was gonna ask you if you think that the suicide rate among trans people is really high because of social norm expectation when it comes to gender, or people assuming that we want to rape people in bathrooms, or et
I
cetera,
think
et
that's
cetera.
part of it.
Or
I think that's
okay,
part of it. I think a lot of people crumble under that kind of a thing.
okay. I just wanted to like make sure you weren't saying that trans people were killing themselves for something like insane that didn't have anything to do with the suicide rates.
No, but I do find, just on a personal level, most trans people I've met are incredibly like mentally unstable, and they struggle with a lot of other mental issues, not just being trans. That's my personal experience.
And sorry if I've been drinking this whole time. You probably know this. Estrogen makes you really dehydrated. So I'm trying not to pass out and die.
Yeah,
This
it's
live
fine.
stream.
Okay.
Okay.
I do have something kind of interesting to add if you don't mind.
Okay.
So part and parcel to a lot of things that I've been studying over the past 4 years, and part because of my school, and part just for things that I'm really interested in. The aspect of mental illness is really interesting because if we're talking about just the United States alone, 18.2% of the adult population is in some way afflicted with mental illness. And this can be anything from simple as like minor scale depression to full blown, dissociative identity disorder, which I guess they renamed that to something different recently. But anyway,
no, that's the new name.
is that I thought that was the new name, and then they renamed it to something else.
The old name is multiple personality.
Right. And yeah, but so that's almost 1 in 5 people has something that's going on with them, and usually needs to have a lot of compassion for it. When you get into something like transitioning, even if it's just hormones, we all went through puberty. We all know what hormones can fucking do to our brains.
Yeah.
It's not unreasonable to believe that then people who are trying to treat a situation like being transgender and having to go through biological changes might be at a higher rate. But I started looking up some of these studies from individual clinics, and some of them, the spread of how many people post transition, their mental conditions went away. The spread among all of them is wild. I have one that's 5% that their conditions stayed the same. I have one that's 90, one that's 65. I mean, it runs the gamut. So, I mean,
right. That's a great point. I find that to be the case with a lot of studies done on trans people, that it's just so hard to get an accurate number about anything. That's why the premise of so many debates on transgenderism are inherently flawed, because there's just very few accurate studies out there. It's such a small portion of the population. Like I said, we're not included on the census. So no one knows an accurate sample size to take when it comes to doing studies. It's just a thing. That's why a lot of people take issue with me talking about personal experience, but you don't have much but that to go off of a lot of times, because a lot of these studies are incredibly biased. They have agendas. The numbers you get are so wildly different. And so a lot of times for me, I'll admit maybe it's, intellectually lazy, but I do go off of personal experience because I've had close, intimate experience with a lot of trans people. And I've been immersed in kind of this community for a long time. I would say that as of recently, I'm kind of sifting out of it because I find a lot of them hate me for my videos. But before my channel,
I don't hate you. Let's just be clear.
okay,
My hate is reserved for one person, and it's myself. But go ahead, continue.
Oh, that's dark. I didn't think you hated me. I just thought you were very passionate about wanting to debate me, which is fine. What was I saying? Yeah, a lot of times you just have to go off personal experience because there are no accurate numbers out there.
Cool. And so, like, do you have something to say, Jeff? Because I saw your mic come on.
I was debating it. I was gonna say too. I'm extremely critical of social sciences. Extremely. I'm a hardline empiricist, biologist. I have a degree in biology. I'm trying to get a bigger degree in biology. But yeah, I want to get masters, maybe even higher in biology if I can. But if there's ever a realm of social science that I think actually does need more attention, it is, you know, like the both of you have mentioned, there is not very good concise numbers on a lot of these things we're talking about. And as society does adopt and get more accepting of people who are transgendered, or whatever nomenclature we need to use that's very PC these days, I think it's important that it actually be studied. That's probably like the only area of social sciences that I actually think needs a whole lot of attention. Everything else is done to fucking death. That's all.
Yeah, but even then it's concerning because typically the people involved in social science, you know, it's overrun with leftists. We can just say that. So then it's like, are you really going to get accurate numbers?
Hey, opinions. But so since we're like, are we done with 0.9? Like,
I think so. I think your question was pretty simple. Why I said.
Okay. So this is something that I've just always wanted to know about you. Know about you. So if you don't mind answering a question in regard to like your ideology, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
You said that, since I called you a conservative, you said that you are not a conservative. And I personally had never heard you say that you're not a conservative before. So I would like to know, like, how, in what way are you not a conservative? Because, like, I'm pretty sure all of your videos are from a conservative mindset. Well, I guess besides the fact that you don't identify as a conservative, but like these ideas are really conservative. So
I don't think so. I think maybe you don't have a lot of experience around like true conservatives, social conservatives, hardline conservatives. Very few people classify me as a conservative, and people who do are usually leftists, such as yourself. It's never anyone who watches me. I would say that I think there's this idea that you have to identify, you know, check a box. Are you a conservative? Are you a liberal? Are you a centrist? Blah, blah, blah. And for me, I would say that realistically, if you lined up all my views on paper, I'm probably center right. Right? I'm liberal on multiple issues. And so I don't think it's fair to say that I'm conservative. I think if you really pay attention to my channel versus like true conservative channels, you would see a stark difference.
All right. That's a fair defense.
Yeah. Okay. We're out of bullet points.
I no longer have alcohol. No, I didn't have any to begin with.
I wish I would have drank, but I'm sorry.
I've been drinking enough for the both of you.
Yeah. So I guess that wraps up our debate. It was nice talking to you, and
it was nice talking to you too.
Yeah, and I'll say this. I said it off camera, but I'll say it again. Props to you for, you know, coming on, because I've asked a lot of people in the history of my channel to debate me, and no one has ever said yes. So props to you for coming on and, you know, speaking in front of an audience that I'm sure you know is predisposed to not agree with you and to side with me, because it is my channel, it is my subscriber.
Right.
And shout out to Rob Dyke, who's been in the chat the entire time. And I think that is about it. In other news, I have a new video on my channel that went up yesterday that you guys can go watch. And do you want to shout out you guys' info?
My name is IndigoFoxe. You can find me all over the place at IndigoFoxe because I'm a branding specialist. And that's really about it. I write stuff. Honestly, that's all I do.
My name is Jeff Holiday. I am a meat popsicle, and you can find me on YouTube and Twitter or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely subscribe to Jeff. He has a really great channel.
And thank you. And I want to say thank you for having me because, like, much to your point, like I told you off screen, like people who have different viewpoints usually don't want to talk to me like at all. So thank you for having me on.
Yeah, and it's nice to talk to someone rather than at someone for a change. So other than that, I will say thank you to everyone who has donated. Someone just did $50 in the last minute. Thank you so much. It really means a lot. And yeah, also, I'm doing fan meetups soon in San Francisco this weekend. If you can make it out to San Francisco, if you're near San Francisco, I'm doing a meetup. I'm also doing a meetup in LA. The LA one is not for sure, but if enough people want to come out, then yes. A lot of people have said yes to the San Francisco one. I'm talking really fast, I know. If you want to come to meet up in LA or San Francisco, tweet me, Snapchat me, email me. Just let me know so I can gauge how many of you want to come. There's been quite a few people who have said yes so far on Snapchat, so it'll be fun.
We have a show.
I have one thing.
Oh no, please go ahead.
Oh
yeah.
I was gonna ask if are you going to VidCon?
We both are.
You both are? Are you going to be featured creators at VidCon?
No,
No, you're not.
Girl,
Okay,
I am not the right kind of YouTuber. They are not gonna fucking put my ass up on there.
Okay, so if like, I'm sure we actually might not see each other because we run in different groups, but I'm going to try my best. If you want to, we can try and have this discussion on a bigger platform at VidCon.
That could be cool.
Not even just with me, but like with other people as well. Because I know Riley J. Dennis, I want to.
Girl,
if that's something
but
if that's something you're into, I can try and see what I can do with the people I know.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I'm meeting up with Jeff Holiday, Andy Worski, Mr. Repsion, and some others at VidCon.
I love Mr. Repsion. Okay.
Chris Reagan, some black guy.
I love him. I've been subscribed to Mr. Repsion for years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's gonna be a fun time.
For sure. So like I said, if you're in LA or San Francisco, if you're in LA or San Francisco, get a hold of me. Let me know you want to come hang out. I would love to like go to a bar with subscribers, do what we do. And just a PSA, I don't keep streams up on my channel. So if you want to copy this link so that you have it, it'll be unlisted on my channel. So if you want to copy this link to come back to it for whatever reason, go ahead and do that now. Because after the stream ends, it'll be unlisted on my channel and it won't be visible.
I still have the tweet, right? Like when you DM me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. And yeah.
A live streaming channel, Blaire. You really should.
I know I should. I really should. I'm going to do a travel vlog channel soon. I'm going to vlog traveling and stuff. But
and coming first thing in March. First thing in March, me, Blaire, Repsion, and Andy Worski, we're making a show.
Yes, we have a podcast coming out soon. Jeff Holiday, Andy Worski, Mr. Repsion, and myself. And we'll have like a 4-way. Yeah. I just said we're going to have a 4-way. I mean, maybe, who knows? You know, maybe we'll have a 4-way too. I'm not sure.
I love a good orgy.
I am too pure for this. We need to leave. I love everyone, and thank you guys so much for tuning in. We had a lot of fucking viewers, and it was really fun. So, bye, everyone.